At 4:47 a.m., 6 Venezuelan warships quietly crossed an invisible line in the Caribbean. On their bridges, captains believed they were sending a message. On an American radar screen, it looked like the opening move of a war. Within seconds, the USS George Washington, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier carrying more firepower than Venezuela's entire navy, was no longer just being watched. It was being tracked. Radars switched modes. Algorithms woke up. And a system designed for global war made a decision faster than any human ever could. What the Venezuelan commanders didn't realize was that the moment their sensors locked on, Aegis had already finished the fight, mathematically, silently, and without firing a single shot. If you want to understand how modern naval confrontations are decided before sailors even feel fear, subscribe to TRC Aviation. We don't dramatize history. We reconstruct it, second by second, the way professionals see it. Because what happened next wasn't bravery versus bravery. It was technology versus inevitability. What you're about to witness isn't speculation. It's how modern warfare actually unfolds. At TRC Aviation, we break down real confrontations with precision, intelligence, and cinematic depth. If you value truth over hype, analysis over noise, and stories that respect your intelligence, subscribe to TRC Aviation. These breakdowns are rare, and the next one is already unfolding. At 4:47 a.m., the radar room aboard the USS George Washington was silent. The kind of silence that only exists right before something irreversible happens. The Atlantic was calm. The carrier strike group moved steadily through international waters, its formation precise, disciplined, lethal. Then the screen lit up. 6 surface contacts. Tight formation. Venezuelan naval signatures. The radar operator leaned forward. This wasn't random traffic. This was deliberate. 8. The contacts were forming a line, not parallel, not trailing, but blocking. Someone, somewhere in Caracas, had just ordered their navy to place warships directly across the projected path of a nuclear-powered American supercarrier. That order alone carried weight. What followed carried consequences. The Venezuelan vessels maneuvered into what naval tacticians immediately recognized as a Wolfpack-style interdiction formation, a doctrine designed decades earlier to overwhelm larger ships through coordinated saturation. The Almirante Brion, a guided missile frigate, held the center line at precisely calculated bearing and distance. Smaller patrol craft fanned out in a crescent, maintaining exact intervals. 2 fast attack craft lingered wide, sealing the flanks. It wasn't just positioning that set off alarms. Their fire control radars switched modes, search to track. On an American warship, that change means one thing: hostile intent. And the response to that intent does not come from humans. It comes from Aegis. Within 0.3 seconds, the USS Gettysburg's ANSPI-1D radar detected the frequency shift. Threat level elevated, targets classified, engagement envelopes calculated, intercept solutions generated, data shared across every U.S. platform within 340 nautical miles. All of it happened before a single Venezuelan radar operator finished confirming his lock. Aegis didn't just see the ships, it knew them. It knew the Almirante Brion carried Italian-built Automat Mk2 anti-ship missiles. It knew their maximum range. It knew their guidance limitations. It knew they required 82 seconds of uninterrupted radar illumination to achieve a successful launch. Aegis also knew it needed 4.7 seconds to fire an SM-2 interceptor. Above the carrier, the air wing was already moving. 4 FA-18 Super Hornets were scrambled, armed with AGM-88 HARM missiles, weapons designed to hunt radar emissions like predators sensing blood in the water. They climbed to altitude beyond Venezuelan detection, hiding in the clutter of their own coastline. Below the surface, the ocean was not empty either. Unseen, unheard, patient. The Venezuelan commanders believed they were forcing a decision. They didn't realize the decision had already been made, by algorithms, sonar arrays, and doctrines rehearsed for decades. This was no standoff. This was a mathematics problem. And Venezuela was about to discover how unforgiving modern naval mathematics can be. The moment Venezuelan fire control radars shifted from search mode to tracking mode, the balance of power vanished. Aboard the USS Gettysburg, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser escorting the USS George Washington, the Aegis combat system reacted faster than any human could comprehend. In just 0.3 seconds, the AN SPY-1D phased array radar detected a subtle frequency change, one that signaled hostile intent under U.S. Navy rules of engagement. Threat condition escalated from yellow to red automatically. No alarms, no shouting, just data moving at machine speed. Aegis classified all 6 Venezuelan vessels instantly. Hull types, displacement, known weapon systems, missile ranges, radar signatures, fire control timelines. Within seconds, it calculated 24 separate engagement solutions, accounting for every possible maneuver the Venezuelan formation could attempt. The system identified the Almirante Brion as the primary threat. Italian-made Automat Mech-2 anti-ship missiles capable of striking targets up to 100 nautical miles away. Dangerous, but outdated. What Aegis knew, and Venezuelan commanders did not, was time. Venezuelan missile doctrine required 82 seconds of continuous radar illumination to complete a successful launch sequence. Aegis, by contrast, required less than 5 seconds to launch and guide an SM-2 interceptor. The math was merciless. Before the Venezuelan DAR operators even confirmed their target locks, Aegis had already solved the engagement. Simultaneously, that information wasn't staying local. It was distributed automatically across every U.S. platform within 340 nautical miles. Destroyers, submarines, carrier air wing, and command nodes, creating a single, shared tactical picture. Every American unit now saw the same threat, in the same place, at the same time. Above the carrier group, 4 FA-18 Super Hornets were already airborne. They hadn't been launched in response to the blockade. They were airborne because U.S. doctrine assumes escalation before it happens. Each jet carried AGM-88 HARM missiles, weapons designed for one purpose: hunt active radar emissions. The Hornets climbed to 45,000 feet, positioning themselves 85 nautical miles out, close enough to strike within 90 seconds, yet far enough that Venezuelan radar couldn't detect them through coastal clutter. Below the surface, the situation was even worse for Venezuela. Unknown to their fleet, they were already being tracked from beneath the waterline. Every move the Venezuelan ships made, speed changes, heading adjustments, formation tightening, was being fed into American fire control systems in real time. The blockade looked bold from Caracas. On American screens, it looked solved. Back on the Almirante Brion, radar operators began noticing something strange. Contacts flickered. Returns duplicated. The carrier group appeared to exist in multiple positions at once. They reported anomalous interference to Naval Command. What they were experiencing wasn't interference. It was electronic attack. American EA-18G Growlers, monitoring Venezuelan frequencies for days, had identified a fatal weakness. Every ship in the formation was using the same encrypted UHF channel, protected by 1970s-era frequency-hopping algorithms. Encryption keys sold in 989, long compromised. The U.S. Navy wasn't guessing what Venezuela was saying. They were reading it. As Caracas debated its next move, American systems were already executing theirs, quietly, efficiently, and without emotion. The confrontation hadn't turned hot yet, but the clock was no longer Venezuela's. And beneath the waves, something was already in position. The Venezuelan captains never realized the fight had already moved beyond the surface. While their radars strained against phantom echoes and false returns, something older and deadlier was already inside their formation. Silent, patient, invisible. 400 feet below the Atlantic, the USS Helena, a Los Angeles-class attack submarine, had been tracking them for nearly 4 days. 96 hours of uninterrupted shadowing, every propeller beat, every rudder adjustment, every mechanical flaw mapped and memorized. American submarine doctrine calls it trail and tail. Close enough to hear the hull vibrations, far enough to remain undetectable. The Helena held position exactly 3,200 yards behind the Almirante Brion, tucked into an acoustic shadow created by the Venezuelan ship's own sonar blind zone. Their sensors couldn't see behind themselves, and the Americans knew it. Helena's sonar operators weren't just listening. They were identifying individual ships by sound alone. Propeller blade patterns, gearbox harmonics, even the slight cavitation caused by worn bearings. Each Venezuelan vessel had its own acoustic fingerprint, and Helena's fire control system had solutions calculated for all 6. Torpedoes were already flooded into tubes 1 through 4. They didn't launch. They didn't need to. Above, the surface battle group felt tense but unresolved. Below, the outcome was already mathematically decided. At 4:49 a.m., Helena's fire control system confirmed it could put Mark 48 anti-cap torpedoes into the water within 5 seconds. Once launched, the weapons would run silent in passive mode for the first. It's 2,000 yards, then switch to active homing at 55 knots. From launch to impact, 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Venezuela's anti-submarine warfare capability required at least 8 minutes to detect, classify, and deploy countermeasures. The math was merciless, and Helena wasn't alone. 18 nautical miles ahead of the carrier group, positioned directly along the Venezuelan fleet's only viable approach vector, the USS Alexandria waited in silence. Stationary. Hidden within a thermocline layer where temperature gradients bent sonar waves like light through water. To Venezuelan sensors, Alexandria simply didn't exist. This was no coincidence. Together, Helena and Alexandria formed what U.S. submarine tacticians call a hammer and anvil geometry. If the Venezuelans advanced, they would pass directly over Alexandria. If they retreated, Helena would follow from behind. Any maneuver placed them inside overlapping engagement zones. No escape path, no winning move. American crews had rehearsed this exact geometry 17 times during Pacific Fleet war games the previous year. This wasn't improvisation. It was doctrine refined over decades of Cold War planning. Up on the surface, Venezuelan radar operators felt something was wrong. Their systems showed inconsistencies they couldn't explain. Ranges that shifted, contacts that duplicated, a creeping sense that they were being watched by something they could not see. What they didn't know was that every second they hesitated, American submarines were tightening the net. And then, at 4:56 a.m., the silence ended. Both U.S. submarines activated their AN/BQQ-10 sonar systems simultaneously. Low-frequency pulses slammed into the water, powerful enough that Venezuelan sailors physically felt the vibration through their hulls. Sonar displays lit up in panic. 2 contacts, one directly behind, one directly ahead. The formation was bracketed. The Venezuelan captains understood instantly. This was no standoff anymore. It was a countdown. The Venezuelan captains still believed they had time. From their bridges, the American carrier group looked distant, silent. Massive, yes, but passive. No missiles launched. No aircraft diving in. No warning shots. To an untrained eye, it looked like hesitation. It wasn't. Inside the USS Gettysburg, the Aegis combat system had already finished the fight. The moment Venezuelan radars shifted into continuous tracking mode, Aegis stopped thinking in minutes and started thinking in probabilities. 6 hostile surface contacts, known missile envelopes, known sensor limitations, known reaction times. The system didn't ask if it could win, it calculated how fast. On one display, engagement arcs bloomed across the sea like invisible minefields. Red lines showed Venezuelan missile reach. Blue cones showed American intercept zones. The overlap wasn't a contest. It was a slaughter diagram. Aegis calculated that Venezuela needed 82 seconds of uninterrupted radar illumination to guide their Italian-made anti-ship missiles. The U.S. needed 4.7 seconds to launch an SM-2 interceptor and kill the missile in midair. That wasn't superiority. That was inevitability. Above the carrier group, 4 FA-18 Super Hornets were already airborne, holding at altitude. Their AGM-88 harms didn't need visual contact. They only needed radar emissions. If Venezuela fired, or even tried to, their own radars would become homing beacons. But the Venezuelans never saw those jets. Their radars were lying to them. Electronic warfare growlers began feeding false returns into Venezuelan fire control systems. The carrier appeared in 3 places at once. Speed vectors didn't make sense. Range calculations contradicted each other. Bridge crews argued. Operators recalibrated. Commanders hesitated. And hesitation was fatal. Below the surface, the ocean told a different story. The USS Helena, a Los Angeles S-class attack submarine, had been stalking the Venezuelan formation for 4 days, close enough to hear individual propeller blades, close enough to recognize ships by sound alone. Its torpedo tubes were already flooded. At the same time, USS Alexandria waited ahead, silent, stationary, hidden in a thermocline layer that bent sonar waves like light through glass. From Venezuela's perspective, the sea ahead was empty. It wasn't. This was classic American submarine doctrine, hammer and anvil. 1 submarine behind, 1 ahead. No maneuver that didn't end in exposure. At 4:56 a.m., both submarines broke their silence. Not with torpedoes, with sonar. A low-frequency pulse rolled through the water, powerful enough to be felt through steel hulls. Venezuelan sonar screens erupted. 2 contacts, 1 behind, 1 ahead. No ambiguity, no escape route. Their ships moved at 12 knots. American submarines could sprint at over 25. Venezuelan anti-submarine weapons couldn't reach half the distance required. Doctrine was clear. When bracketed by submarines with no air cover, withdraw immediately. On the flagship bridge, the Venezuelan captain finally understood. This wasn't a standoff. It was a demonstration. And the Americans hadn't fired a single shot yet. The order to disengage was already forming, but it might be too late. Because once submarines reveal themselves, they're not warning you. They're telling you the math has already been done. By 4:56 a.m., the mathematics of death had finished writing the ending. Inside the Combat Information Center aboard the USS George Washington, the air was calm. No shouting, no panic, just quiet confirmations as systems spoke to systems faster than any human ever could. The Aegis network had already solved the fight. What remained was whether the Venezuelan commanders understood that they had lost. They did, when the sea itself began to speak. The first low-frequency sonar pulse rolled through the water like distant thunder. Sailors aboard the Almirante Brion felt it through their boots, a deep vibration that rattled bulkheads and made coffee cups jump from metal tables. Screens that moments earlier showed clean surface plots suddenly bloomed with impossible symbols. One contact behind them, one ahead. Perfectly aligned, perfectly trapped. The Venezuelan captain didn't need a briefing. He needed arithmetic. Behind his formation, an American attack submarine sat in the acoustic shadow, close enough to hear individual propeller blade harmonics. Ahead, another waited in a thermocline layer where sound bent away like light through glass. Between them lay 6 surface ships with outdated sonar, limited countermeasures, and nowhere to go without sailing directly over a torpedo solution already locked. In under 10 seconds, the captain understood what his political leadership had not. This was not a standoff. It was a demonstration. On the American side, nothing moved. No missiles launched, no aircraft descended. The Super Hornets loitered at altitude, invisible to coastal radar, carrying weapons they would never need to fire. The submarines remained silent again, their brief sonar reveal already enough to end the encounter. Venezuelan doctrine, written decades earlier under Soviet instruction, was explicit about one scenario above all others. Surface vessels bracketed by submerged contacts without air superiority were to disengage immediately. Courage was irrelevant. Firepower meaningless. Survival depended on retreat. The order was given. One by one, Venezuelan ships broke formation. Fire control radars powered down. Tracking modes reverted to search. Bows turned toward the safety of shallow coastal waters where American submarines could not legally or safely pursue. The blockade dissolved not with explosions, but with silence. From first radar lock to withdrawal, the confrontation had lasted less than 9 minutes. No shots were fired, no flags were lowered, yet every sailor involved understood what had happened. A modern carrier strike group had faced an opposing navy and defeated it without crossing the threshold of violence. Not through intimidation, through information dominance, training, and systems built to act faster than fear. As dawn broke over the Caribbean, the George Washington continued on course, its flight deck already preparing for routine operations. To the outside world, nothing had occurred. No headlines, no footage, no wreckage. But inside Venezuelan Naval Command, the lesson was brutal and permanent. Modern warfare is no longer decided by who dares more. It is decided by who sees first, who connects faster, who understands that by the time you realize you are in danger, the battle was already over.